It is deeply unsettling to learn that countless individuals' private information is being bought and sold by online data brokers. Fortunately, today's sponsor, Delete.me, provides a swift, secure, and effective way to remove your personal data from the internet. But more on that later. Blue lilies swayed in clusters along the edges of the teepees, where children played and elders exchanged quiet conversations. The days of traditional gatherings upon this vast prairie were drawing to a close. The bands of the Namipu, or Nez Perce people, were making their final journey into exile. In 1855, a treaty had secured the Nez Perce's legal right to nearly all of their ancestral land. However, that changed in 1860, when gold was discovered in the region by Euro-American prospectors. In a slow but relentless encroachment, thousands of miners descended upon the land, tearing at the earth in their insatiable pursuit of wealth. Boomtowns sprang up almost overnight, their promise of prosperity fueling an unending influx of settlers who staked claims, built farms, and established ranches, brazen violations of the original treaty. Despite their long-standing alliance with the United States, the Nez Perce refrained from immediate retaliation, instead pleading for a diplomatic resolution. Determined to retain the mines and settlements, government officials redrew the boundaries in 1863, persuading a faction of conciliatory Nez Perce leaders to sign a treaty relinquishing nearly 90% of their people's land. Chief Joseph of the Wallowa Valley likened this betrayal to learning that a neighbor had sold one's horses without permission. The Nez Perce were not a monolithic entity, but a confederation of semi-autonomous bands, none of which possessed the authority to negotiate on behalf of the others. Even U.S. commissioners acknowledged this in 1873, conceding that if any respect were to be paid to the customs and governance of the Nez Perce, then the 1863 treaty could not be considered binding upon Joseph and his band. But no such respect was given. While the majority of Nez Perce had moved onto the reservation, outlying bands led by Chief Joseph, Tuulhulzot, Looking Glass, and Whitebird remained peacefully on their ancestral lands. It was only in 1877, when the military pressure from General Oliver Otis Howard escalated, that they were finally compelled to move toward the reservation. Not all could bear the weight of surrender. One night, a few young Nez Perce men, bitter over years of mistreatment, recalled the injustices inflicted upon their people. Settlers had stolen their cattle and horses, slain their men, and assaulted their women, crimes that were ignored by the American legal system. Enraged, 3 Nez Perce rode out to avenge a relative's death, attacking homes and killing several men. The next night, 16 more warriors joined them, launching a brutal assault that left around 15 settlers dead. Chief Joseph, away from the camp during the raids, later reflected with regret. Our young men were hot-headed, and I struggled greatly to keep them from rash actions. I know that they did wrong, yet the deeds of a few had given the U.S. government a justification for war. General Howard swiftly mobilized over 100 troops to a canyon where most of the Nez Perce had moved their camp. As a group of Nez Perce approached under a white flag, an American volunteer opened fire. The soldiers then dismounted and advanced upon the camp. But war cries soon erupted from the surrounding hills. 60 Nez Perce sharpshooters emerged from the landscape, strategically targeting trumpeters and officers to disrupt the chain of command. As the American forces faltered, the rolling hills became littered with their dead. By the end of the engagement, over 30 U.S. soldiers had fallen, yet not a single Nez Perce had been killed. The Nez Perce were formidable warriors, mounted on swift, well-bred Appaloosa horses. They executed tactical maneuvers with precise hand signals, bolstered their morale with taunts and war songs, and, lacking a steady supply of ammunition, had trained themselves to be expert marksmen with every bullet they fired. Fearing that more indigenous groups would rally to Joseph's side, General Howard ordered the arrest of the neutral chief Looking Glass and his people. But the attack on his village shattered any illusion of neutrality. As U.S. cavalry raided the settlement, they plundered homes and seized 600 horses. With no choice but to fight, Looking Glass and his followers joined Joseph's band in early July. The growing group, now joined by a few Palouse allies, numbered around 800 people, including roughly 250 warriors. After fending off an attack by Howard's forces, they vanished into the treacherous terrain of the Bitterroot Range. Cutting through the mountains, the miles-long caravan carried their people, food, teepees, and weapons upon the backs of 2,000 horses. The Nez Perce had long traversed these mountains for bison hunts and had built alliances with various Great Plains tribes. Looking Glass assured his fellow leaders that they could find refuge among the Crow, with whom they had once fought side by side against the Sioux. 7 decades earlier, Lewis and Clark had emerged from this very route, charting a path that the Nez Perce now hoped would lead them to safety. The Nez Perce had once shown kindness to the starving Americans, offering them food and hospitality. On their return journey, the Lewis and Clark expedition stayed with the Nez Perce for over a month, during which time bonds of friendship were pledged between the two peoples. Early French-Canadian traders referred to several indigenous groups as Perce Nose or Perce, a term that was later anglicized and applied specifically to the Namipu. Ironically, by the time the name became common, most Nez Perce had long abandoned the practice of nose piercing. For generations, the Nez Perce thrived in their homeland of rivers, mountains, and sweeping prairies. Their dwellings ranged from teepees to larger lodges crafted from woven reed mats or bison hides. Salmon formed the cornerstone of their diet, supplemented by wild plants and hunted game. While many wore simple buckskin garments, the Nez Perce were known for their artistry in dress. Women adorned themselves with intricately woven basket hats, vibrantly colored dresses, and delicate jewelry, while men donned sacred war shirts and decorative accessories. The Nez Perce believed themselves guided by spiritual protectors known as Wayakin, unseen forces that granted strength and wisdom. As Christianity spread among them, some embraced its teachings, while others turned to the Dreamer faith, a prophetic movement that called for a return to indigenous ways, proclaiming that spiritual salvation and deliverance lay in the old traditions. To many, it seemed that the world as they knew it was ending. The forests and plains were stripped of their animals. Entire villages had been decimated by disease, and those who survived found themselves cast out of their ancestral lands. The Nez Perce scouts believed that General Howard remained weeks behind their trail, giving them time to move unchallenged. What they did not realize was that the U.S. Army had summoned reinforcements from frontier forts, closing in from multiple directions. The Nez Perce made camp along the banks of the Big Hole River, their teepees standing at the base of a high slope. That night, over 100 American soldiers crept within striking distance of the camp. Later, they would recall how close they had been, close enough to hear the barking of dogs and the cries of Nez Perce infants. As dawn approached on August 9th, the soldiers launched their assault, instructed to fire low into the teepees to cut people down in their sleep. Gunfire raked through the camp as the Nez Perce fled in terror. A boy who hid in a nearby stream with his mother later recalled a haunting image. One little girl lifted her arm above the water. There was a hole in it so big I could see right through. But the Nez Perce were not defenseless. Their warriors struck back fiercely, inflicting heavy losses on the attackers and forcing them into the nearby woods. A prolonged sniping battle allowed the Nez Perce to cover their retreat. Though they managed to escape, the cost was devastating. Between 60 and 90 Nez Perce lay dead, many of them women and children. For their role in the massacre, 6 American soldiers were awarded the Medal of Honor. In the aftermath, the shaken Nez Perce questioned the leadership of Looking Glass. Yet 10 days later, he demonstrated his tactical prowess. Leading a bold raid on Howard's camp, he and his men stole over 100 mules and horses, dealing a humiliating blow to the general's campaign. Frustrated and fatigued from the prolonged pursuit, Howard faced criticism from the highest ranks. Commanding General William T. Sherman chastised him for his failure to swiftly subdue the Nez Perce. Undeterred, the Nez Perce pressed onward, their path leading them into unfamiliar territory, land known in those days as the Burning Ground, the newly established Yellowstone National Park. Here, amidst towering forests and steaming geysers, the land bore the scars of an ancient cataclysm. They traveled across the vast caldera of a supervolcano, its hidden power lying dormant for over 600,000 years. Not so long ago, the land had teemed with life. Great herds of bison thundered past shimmering hot springs. Grizzlies and moose wandered the wooded hills, and the howls of wolves echoed through the valleys. Now, the wilderness had grown quieter. Along the frontier, wildlife had been relentlessly trapped, shot, and poisoned. The land itself was changing, and for the indigenous peoples who had called it home for millennia, it was vanishing before their eyes. General Sherman himself remarked upon the brutal transformation. He wrote with satisfaction of how the deliberate extermination of game had starved Native Americans out of their homelands, paving the way for settlers and industry. This vast region has undergone, in the past 10 years, a more violent and radical change than any like space of the Earth's surface during any previous 50 years. The game is nearly all gone. The Indian has been forced onto small reservations. I can bear personal testimony that where, in 1868, millions of buffalo could be found, not a single one is now seen. With their world crumbling around them, the Nez Perce pressed on, clinging to the hope that somewhere ahead, sanctuary awaited. While the wildlife of Yellowstone would one day recover, for now, the vast and untamed park was a place of refuge. Over the next 2 weeks, the main Nez Perce caravan avoided detection by briefly capturing groups of tourists, providing them with food and directions before releasing them. However, small bands of warriors, still burning with fury over the massacre at Big Hole, broke away and attacked several travelers, acts that Chief Joseph condemned. Meanwhile, Looking Glass sought aid from the Crow, but they refused his request. To defy the United States was a risk they would not take. With few options left, the Nez Perce placed their final hope in the distant north. A year earlier, after his victory at Little Bighorn, Lakota Chief Sitting Bull had led his followers into Canada, beyond the reach of the U.S. military. There, only the Northwest Mounted Police patrolled, and they lacked the authority to extradite armed indigenous warriors. Whitebird had long advocated that the Nez Perce seek asylum with Sitting Bull, and now the Council of Chiefs agreed. The idea of such an alliance had not escaped General Howard, but General Philip Sheridan dismissed the possibility as unrealistic. While Howard continued his pursuit, additional forces under Colonel Samuel Sturgis maneuvered to intercept the Nez Perce. Threading their way through the jagged Clark's Fork Canyon, the Nez Perce ascended its towering rock walls, deliberately milling their horses in a circular motion to obscure their trail before fainting south. Sturgis took the bait and followed the false trail, only to realize too late that the Nez Perce had doubled back north through the canyon and vanished onto the open plains. Sturgis finally caught up with them on September 13th, aided by Crow scouts who helped him capture many Nez Perce horses. But the warriors struck back, killing several of his men before slipping away into the night. The long days of riding ahead were marked by bitter exhaustion and haunted nights beneath an endless sky. Near Cow Island, the starving Nez Perce clashed with soldiers, raiding supplies from Steamboat Landing and a wagon train. As they pushed north, the winds turned colder. Their horses faltered. Their bodies and spirits bore the weight of grief. Looking Glass urged the weary band to make camp in the foothills of the Bear Paw Mountains. They had traveled over 1,000 miles in 4 months, and now, at last, they were just 40 miles from the Canadian border, the threshold of freedom. But their pursuers had not relented. Colonel Nelson A. Miles, a hardened officer who had spent the past year routing Lakota resistance, had been tracking them with a formidable force, reinforced by Cheyenne scouts. On September 30th, Miles struck. His men stormed the Nez Perce camp, firing relentlessly at defenders and seizing most of their remaining horses. Some Nez Perce managed to flee north, but the majority were surrounded. Warriors fought fiercely, trading deadly shots with the enemy, even as American troops tightened their grip. Among the fallen were the respected war leader Tulhulzot and Joseph's younger brother, Allakut. That night, Snow fell over the battlefield. It settled upon the lifeless bodies of kinfolk, while the living dug into the frozen earth for shelter. Warriors kept vigil in rifle pits, knowing that the enemy would return at dawn. Artillery rained upon the Nez Perce positions as they waited in desperate hope. If those who had escaped could reach Sitting Bull and return with Lakota reinforcements, they might yet scatter the Americans. Looking Glass climbed a ridge to scan the horizon for rescuers. A soldier's bullet struck him in the head. The stalemate dragged on for days. By October 4th, General Howard arrived at Miles' camp. Each side had lost roughly 25 men, but the Nez Perce were starving, freezing, and depleted. The following day, Chief Joseph rode over the White Hills, his rifle across his lap, flanked by 5 companions. He met with Howard Miles, and his words were recorded for history. Asterisk, I am tired of fighting. Our chiefs are killed. Looking Glass is dead. Tuwalhulzot is dead. The old men are all dead. He who led the young men is dead. The little children are freezing to death. Some of my people have fled to the hills. They have no blankets, no food. No one knows where they are. I want time to search for my children and see how many of them I can find. Maybe I shall find them among the dead. Hear me, my chiefs. I am tired. My heart is sick and sad. From where the sun now stands, I will fight no more forever. Asterisk White Bird and a small band of followers managed to escape north, eventually reaching Sitting Bull's camp. In all, around 200 Nez Perce made it to Canada. Joseph and many others might have fled as well, but they refused to abandon their wounded, their elderly, and their children. The 400 who surrendered at the Battle of Bear Paw did so, believing they would be sent to the Nez Perce Reservation, the last remaining fragment of their homeland. They were mistaken. Despite Colonel Miles' advocacy for a fair resolution, General William T. Sherman overruled him, ordering that the Nez Perce prisoners be exiled to Indian Territory, a desolate expanse of land already populated by other displaced peoples, including the Comanche. And Osage. Just days after the war's conclusion, the New York Times published a scathing editorial. We freely express the opinion that the Nez Perce War was, on the part of our government, an unpardonable and frightful blunder, a crime whose victims alike are the hundreds of our gallant officers and men, and the peaceful bands who were goaded by injustice and wrong to the warpath. The belief that the Nez Perce had been wrongfully dispossessed and unjustly pursued was not the invention of later revisionists. It was in fact a widely held view among Americans at the time. Even Sherman, despite his unwavering commitment to U.S. expansion, conceded that the Nez Perce had fought with remarkable humanity, courage, and military prowess, earning admiration from all who witnessed their campaign. Chief Joseph, now a national figure, traveled to Washington, D.C., where he delivered impassioned speeches, pleading for the right to return to his homeland. Yet his words, though stirring, could not undo the damage. The Nez Perce had lost up to 150 people during the war. Within just 3 years of exile, starvation and disease, exacerbated by meager rations and inadequate medical care, claimed the lives of 150 more, including nearly every young child. Among the dead was Joseph's own daughter. General Howard, who had pursued them relentlessly, later wrote to Joseph in a rare moment of empathy, "I have much compassion for you. I feel sorry that so many have sickened and died." Colonel Miles, though an ardent believer in the forced civilization of indigenous peoples, also expressed remorse. "We have carried on a cruel, relentless war of extermination against the Indian." Over time, many Nez Perce who had fled to Canada made their way back to the United States. In 1885, the survivors of Indian Territory were finally permitted to return to the Pacific Northwest. However, their people remained scattered, fragmented among various reservations, their way of life permanently altered. Chief Joseph was not even allowed to live on the Nez Perce Reservation. Instead, he was exiled to the Colville Reservation in Washington, far from his homeland in the Wallowa Valley. The dream of reclaiming his father's land remained just that, a dream. He died in exile in 1904. 1 year after the Nez Perce surrender, General Philip Sheridan, who had overseen the forced removal of thousands of indigenous people across the West, offered an unvarnished explanation of the violence that had consumed the frontier. It is often wondered at by the general public why we should have Indian wars. We took away their country and their means of support, broke up their mode of living, their habits of life, introduced disease and decay among them, and it was for this and against this that they made war. Would anyone expect less?